So today we are going to be looking at Blackboard tests, WT class tests. How do you build it? How do you look at it kind of as a student? How do you grade it? All kind of those components related to building those tests. So while we get started, I want to start by asking everyone a question. Let me launch my poll here. Just trying to get an idea of where everyone is in this process of creating tests. Have you ever created tests in WT class before? Have you had ITS? Have you had us help create your tests in the past? Especially, you know, those tests in the past spring, if we helped you set them up, those were kind of those kind of tests. Or have you never created any tests before? I just kind of been looking to see kind of where we're all standing ahead of time before we get going. I'll give everyone just a couple of seconds left. Most everyone has answered. All right, so I will go ahead and end our poll here. And I'll share things back so y'all can see, have an idea of where everyone is right now. So right now we have a couple of people that have been creating their own tests. We have a lot of people that have had us help. So you at least have a little bit of an idea of kind of the requirements for tests. And then we have a good percentage also that haven't never used tests before, which is fine. Just kind of wanted to have an idea where we were going to start with. All right, so let me continue on here. So like I kind of mentioned already, we are going to go through the entire process of adding a test. We're going to create a test. We're going to do what is called deploying a test, which is essentially setting it up so that students can take a test. We will then kind of look at how do students take a test kind of really quickly, so you have an idea of that. We'll look at grading a test, and then if we have time, we'll also look at how students then review a test. So we are going to start with our creating test option. So let me switch over here to WT class so that we can get into creating a test. So I always recommend whenever we are creating tests, we go to the back end of the course first, so you have an idea of where you go, where those are actually stored in the course. So within any course in WT class, in our control panel, if you go to the course tools area, you will then go to the test surveys and polls. Here you can see there are the three different options. We're going to look at tests today. So we will click on tests, and we start by having our build test and import test. I always like to disclaimer right here, this import test is not like that file for those of y'all that had sent us a file to help create test. This is not what we use. This import test is actually a test that has already been built in WT class that has been exported, and you're looking to move it to another course. That is what this import test is. It is looking for a Blackboard, a WT class file, an export zip file to be able to import in. So this is not going to be what you are going to be looking for in the case of building new exams. So we will click on build test. And then we start by entering a name. So I'm going to call this exam 1. And then we notice we have a description area and an instructions area. Now, typically, I do not recommend entering anything into the description or instructions area. I'm going to put some stuff in here so that we can see where does it end up, partially so that you can see later on kind of why I don't recommend this. So my description is test will cover chapters 1 through 3. And then please answer all questions. Just so we have something in each one of these so we know where those end up later on. We will click submit. And so then we get to the test canvas page. This is then where you actually start to add questions in. You can see right here from the top, here's the description and instructions that we already added in. If I needed to change this information, I come back to this page, I click the drop-down menu next to the title, and I go to edit. That would take me back to that page I was just on to be able to edit this description, instructions, as well as the name, although there are some other locations in which you can change this name besides just this area. So we do have some buttons here that we'll kind of go over. So I'm going to mention this upload questions button, kind of similar to what I mentioned before. This is not going to be like that file that if you did have us help you build a test before, this is not the kind of file that we pull in. We actually use a program called Respondus 4.0. It is a test building software essentially that will import like a Word document into, and then you can pull from Respondus into here. This one is another kind of upload questions area where you can, if you format your document in the right area, it will upload. I'm going to be very honest, it is a very tedious and very specific for all the needs, and it is horrible to try to troubleshoot if you get something wrong. The way we do it is much simpler, much easier, much cleaner import process. So this is probably not something you'll ever use. It's there if you want to try to figure out, feel free. But every time I've ever tried it, I always end up with errors and stuff like that. So I don't ever go to that. I always use Respondus in that case. So our other ways, we are going to start with the create question option. So you can see here there's a whole bunch of different ways for how you can create questions, different question types. So I'm only going to go over the multiple choice option today because that's generally the most common, as well as many of the features that are in here essentially work for a lot of the other more common ones like essays and short answers and stuff like that. It's essentially the same type of scenario, but I'm going to go ahead and stick with multiple choice. So I'm going to click on multiple choice. I always like to mention there is a multiple answer that does actually have, gives the students the ability to select more than one answer as the correct answer. I'm notorious for going too fast and clicking that one instead of the multiple choice, so make sure you're selecting the right one if you are going to use that multiple choice option. So inside of questions, the very first area is going to be a question title. It is not required. It is something that we generally recommend if you're going to be like reusing questions for different things. If you do test banks, if you add test banks, we often add in a question title for the test bank so that you know what chapter it came from, and a kind of a question number so that you can easily kind of sort through them in some ways. But it's not something that you have to have. Students do not see the question title. There's no way to get them to see the question title at this point. So just know that those are there. And so you do have that option to add a question title, but it's not required. But it gives you that option to kind of search for things later on. So then we start with our question text. So I'm going to enter a question here. What color is the sun? Just so we have something going on in here. And then we have some options. Answer numbering is the first area. Basically, whenever a student is looking at a multiple choice question, how is it going to show? The default is none, and basically that means it sets up the question option, and then it sets up the answer. And then the second question option, and then the answer. So the button that they select, and then the answer. There's no A, B, C, D, no 1, 2, 3, stuff like that. In this option, then we do have the ability to set it up to be 1, 2, 3, Roman numerals, A, B, C, D, C, D. You can set it up to then have the option where students select, and then the letter, number, and then the actual answer. So you have those options to be able to set it up if you so choose. And so there we go. Then the next one is then we have the option for the answer orientation. Do we want it to be vertical, which is basically top to bottom, or do we want it to go left to right? You can set it up to be left to right if you're interested in doing that. Just know you want to watch out for lengthy answers, because it can then kind of make it weird and make it this long vertical string of a sentence instead of a nice looking one. This is good for very short answers, yes, no, true, false, those types of questions. You also have the ability to allow partial credit. Most people that use allow partial credit, it's actually allowing more than one answer. So if you realize that a secondary answer is kind of the correct answer, you can come in, allow a partial credit, set a second answer to 100% credit, and so then 2 answers get marked as correct, essentially. But you can also then say, okay, this is not the right answer, but it can be deemed kind of as the secondary best answer. Maybe I'm only going to get 50% credit. So you can do some of that. Also, with the allow partial credit, you also get another option that if you want to actually take away points, you can allow negative scores for incorrect answers. So I don't know of anybody that uses this, but you could do that, especially if you have some of those really weird answers that you're trying to throw somebody off with. You could actually take points away with. And then show answers in random order. So by default, it's going to show every answer ABCD, the exact same way, ABCD, ABCD, ABCD. This is one of those settings that we kind of recommend quite often to help with test integrity. That way no two students are going to get the same answer for a particular answer, because answer A might be answer B for somebody else. On the other hand, this is something that you do have to set up on each individual question. It is not something you can set up on the test itself. And basically that's so that you can make sure that you don't have any of those questions that are like all of the above or answers A and B, because you'd really hate for answers, you know, the answer is answers A and B, and that is answer A. Because then who knows what answer A actually is supposed to be, or where B is for that matter. So you do have that option to do random order, but you do have to set it up on each individual question. Then we have the number of answers. Notice it goes from 4 all the way to 100. So you have plenty of answer choices. So if you need more than 4, which is the default in here, you can always come in and add more here. Additionally, if you realize, you know what, I don't need 4, I only need 3, you just click the remove button below any answer and it will remove that extra option out of there, so that you have fewer options. So then you start by entering your answer. You notice that the correct answer by default is this first one. One of the nice things of going back to that show answers in random order, if you select that option to have them in random order, when you fill it out, you can always have the first answer as being the correct answer and let it randomize for each student as to what that correct answer actually shows in the list. So I'm going to start, what was my question again? Sorry, what color was the sun? Okay, so yellow. I'm not going to randomize simply so that whenever I get to taking the test, it's a little bit easier to make sure I get something wrong without having to pay attention to what my questions are. And then so down here at the bottom, we have a couple of other areas. We have a feedback area, so I can automatically have, after the test is complete or at a later date, it be able to automatically release some feedback. Correct might be good job. Incorrect might also include things like you could find this answer here in your textbook or in this chapter or something like that as well, to provide students with a little bit more feedback on how to get the correct answer. And then the next area, categories and keywords. This allows us to set up things so that later on, if I want to search for another question, I can search on different kind of topics. Whether that's a category, whether that's a specific topic, whether that's a level of difficulty. Maybe I want to later on pull all the medium level questions. I could do that. I could add keywords. And so if I want to research on different things later on, I could search based on different categories and keywords. Lastly, in this page is an instructor notes area. Students don't see this anywhere, but this is good if you ever change an answer or you update some information, you allow multiple answers, things like that. This is a good place to add those notes in so that next semester, if you reteach the course, reuse the same question, and you're like, why is it that way? You have a tracking record inside of here as to what you changed, when you changed it, why you changed it, so you have some of that information. All right, so once you get all of your questions set up, like I said, this is, you know, one of the most common question types. True, false runs very similar to this. The one exception is instead of having A, B, C, D options, you have select true or false. Otherwise, it's kind of the same. Essay and short answer, basically they only have the question and then they have the ability to say, okay, what is the correct answer? Or you know, a similar correct answer look like, and otherwise, you know, that those are kind of all the most common ones, and they all kind of have similar in nature. So the last thing then on this page, we want to either submit and create another, which will pull up another page straight for doing another multiple choice question, or we can submit and go ahead and save this question. So I'm going to click submit so we get taken back to our test canvas, and so there is our question. And so now we can start adding a new question. So we can always come back to our create question, find our multiple choice or whatever kind of question we want to add and add it in. Additionally, and so anytime you do that, it will add in the question to the bottom of the list. Additionally, if I want to add in a question maybe in the middle of the test somewhere, you'll notice that there's these plus signs that appear above and below each question. I can actually click the plus sign above this question, go to multiple choice, and I can add a new question in right above that question. So what color is this guy? And same process and submit. And so now my sky is above the sun. And so we can go through and add in as many questions as we want. If we need to reorder anything, we can drag and drop questions into the right order. Sometimes that can be really hard if you're going from like question 50 to question 2. So there's also this accessibility option up here that if you click on it, you can also click on a particular one, click the up or down arrows one time for each movement. You click submit, it'll tell you that you've reordered it, and now my sky is back above my sun. Oh, sorry, my sun should have moved up, I think. But you can switch it that way. Oh, yeah, there we go. I had switched it. And so you can switch those through that keyboard accessible option as well. So that's how you basically add in questions that I call inline questions. So these are individual questions that are created right now into this test. So the next option is reuse question. So this means basically I already have a question somewhere in this course and I want to reuse that question for something. So we have 3 options: create a question set, create a random block, or find questions. So find questions is going to look at the questions already in this course, and it's going to basically add them in line right like this. Inline again means, or basically means, every student is going to receive every single one of these questions. Under the reuse question option, the top 2, question set and random block, can now allow me to pull a set of questions. So if I have a test bank of chapter 1 that has 50 questions, I could say, okay, my students are only going to get 10 out of these 50 questions. And so that's what these 2 options will basically allow me to do. Again, find questions is going to pull questions and it's going to add them right in the bottom, just like our 2 questions we've already added. So I'm going to go ahead and do find questions real quick just to see how that looks. So it pulls up a box. It might ask you, how do you want to do this? Do you want to link or copy? I usually recommend doing copy first and foremost, and then it'll bring up this page. And so it starts by asking, what do you want to look for? Pools or tests? Do you want to search by specific question types, categories, topics, those different kind of areas that I said you could add to a question itself. So since we already have a test, now typically you're not going to look for questions within the same test that you're already in, but in this case, because I don't have extra tests in this course, we're going to pull from this one that we already have. When I select the test, it pulls up all the questions on the right. If I did do question types, I could sort and say, okay, only pull up multiple choice or only pull out true, false, and it would narrow that search. And so I could select individual questions. I can select all questions. If I need to look at that question, I can click on that button next to it and it'll give me a little preview of that question. I can see where it's coming from. Down at the bottom, I can see how many questions I've selected. If I click the little square that sometimes appears below, sometimes it appears to the right of it, it will actually show me what questions I've selected. So if I'm going across multiple pages, and so it would tell me if I had multiple pages as well, I would know if I've already selected a similar question. And so once I get all the questions selected that I want to pull from, I can click submit. I'll take that box away, and so now we have our additional 2 questions added in here. So reuse question, just so we have an idea, question set and random blocks. I'm going to do one of these as well. The main couple of differences between question sets and random blocks. Question sets will let you look at pools or tests. A random block will only let you look at pools. Now, also, a question set, every time you add questions in, you have to come back and add new questions into a question set. The nice thing with a random block is if you have a pool and you add questions in, and the next semester you decide to add a few more questions in, and the next semester you decide to add a few more questions in, when you do this random block, it'll automatically pull those new questions each time. Where question set, you would have to go back in and then add them into the question set. Those are mainly the main 2 differences as to what they are. Neither one is better than the other. It's just, what are you looking to do long way down the road? Are you looking to say, I want to select this question, but not this question, then that's the question set. If you're looking to add more questions as you go on along the way, I would recommend the random block. Like I said, neither one is a better choice. It's just what works for you and what are your needs. So I'm going to do a question set right now just so you have an idea of how that one works. So it's going to open up a box similar to what we already saw. So there's our pools, there's our tests. So I'm going to click my test. I'm going to click my exam 1. There's my 4 questions that we have in this test. Again, normally you wouldn't be looking in the same test that you're pulling into. I'm going to select all of them because I want all of them to show up for me to start with. And I'll click submit, and it'll add it to the bottom of this page. And so now I can see total questions 4, number of questions to display 1. So I could come in and say, you know what, I actually want this to have 2 questions. So I'm going to click submit. I'll notice on the right, points per question 10, total points 20. And so I can see how all of that goes. I can also see each one of these questions says 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this one actually says 5 to 6. So I know how many questions are being pulled from here. So if I scroll back up at the top, we'll also notice it says total questions, how many total questions are there, and total points. It's very important to note that whatever this total points is set at, this is what will go into the grade book after we get this deployed. That means if I want this test to be worth 100 points, I'm going to have to make sure that this here says it's worth 100 points. It's not smart enough, Blackboard is not smart enough to know it, that I have 6 questions, figure out how many points each question is worth to equal 100. You have to tell it how many points it's going to be worth. So you can do that in a couple of ways. You can click on an individual question and change your answer, change your point values. I also like to point out in this area as well, there is the option for extra credit. So basically you set up how many points a student would earn if they got this correct, and then select the checkbox for extra credit. And so now, where right now it's showing 55, when I click submit, now it takes that out of the total points, and so now that becomes extra credit, and the student could earn 55 out of 50 points. And so I can go through that process. Additionally, I can also do up here a select all, and maybe I say, you know what, I want that to be worth 5, but I don't want anything else to be worth that, and I want everything else to be worth 20. And so then I can update, and now I got my 100 points, even though this is still 5 points extra, it would be 105 points possible out of 100. And so that is how we can change all of those. If we ever need to edit any question, you can click the drop down. There's the edit. You can copy it as well, or you can delete it. Do know that once a student takes a test, you can no longer add questions or delete questions from a test. So just be aware of that. So that is the basics for how do you create a test. You're going to add all your questions in and be able to do all your questions that way. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of my test here and click OK. So we're still in that back end of the course, that test surveys and pool. Now we notice we now show our one test in here. It tells me my test name. I can click drop down, I can click edit, and I can edit this and get back to that test Canvas page if I need to. This is where if I need to copy this test and move it to another course, I could copy, or I could export it to the local computer, and that's what works with this import test button. I can also duplicate by copying it, or I can delete it as well. The deployed area then lets me know if this is actually in the class somewhere. I don't want to delete a deployed test because that might also delete student data with it, student submissions. It would tell me the immediate folder that it is in. It's not going to tell me the full path, so it might not say lessons, unit 1, chapter 1 test. It would just say chapter 1. And so I wouldn't necessarily know where chapter 1 is, but it gives me a closer idea of where I need to go to look for it. So that's going to let me know that information, and then it's also going to let me know when I last edited that particular test. So I'm going to stop for just a minute. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to add it into the chat as we're going along. I have a couple of people that are kind of keeping an eye out and will be able to answer your questions. And I'm trying to keep an eye out as well to be able to then answer those as we need to. All right. So the next set then is we want to deploy the test. We want to make it available for our students to be able to actually access it and take the test. So I'm going to go to the lessons area. You can go to any content area, anywhere that students can access the course. This could be in lessons. This could be something titled content. This could be in the lessons area in the Unit 1 folder, wherever you want students to access it. Because this is a gradable item, it will be under assessments, and we'll notice that first option is then test. So we'll click on that button. It's going to pull up a list of all of our existing tests that are in the course. Do know if you've already deployed a test once, it cannot be deployed again. So after I click exam 1 and I deploy this, if I came back to this page, it would no longer be an option on here. I would have to create a copy to deploy it a second time. Notice there is a button to create a test here. It basically pushes you into the back end of the course right to where we are. I always like to show everyone how to do it from the back end of the course, because every once in a while I get a faculty member that says, I created this test and now it's gone and I can't find it. Well, they went to this create, and then when they got done with it, it didn't show up necessarily. Well, it's still in the back end of the course, they just didn't deploy it, and so they think they lost it. So I always like to show that back in so you know where it actually ended up. So we click exam 1 because this is what we want to deploy. We're going to click submit. And so it starts by adding in a name. I could edit this name, and if I add a name here, if I change this name, it also changes it back in the test surveys and pulls and updates that as well. Notice it does pull the test description over by default. I'm going to add in our test instructions, just so you can see where exactly that ends up in relation to the others. And I'm going to select one of these options. So test description, test instructions. Do I want to show those to students before they start the test? So I'm going to do just test description, basically where I can show where both of these show up versus just the ones I check. All right, so moving on down the page, open test in a new window. So this is set by default to no, and we recommend leaving it at this setting. It's for a couple of reasons. We occasionally get notices that there's some known issues with tests that open up in a new window, and they just don't seem to have those same issues when they don't open up in a new window. We don't have any known issues right now, but every once in a while those do kind of pop up. Additionally, the most common thing is if it opens up in a new window, it almost to me feels like a student gets the idea of, oh, well, it's in a secondary window. Maybe I can go peruse the class to find my answers because it's still over there in that other window. Where if it's all in one window, sometimes they fear that, well, if I get out of this, is it going to kick me out of this test? So I always feel like it almost promotes cheating and looking up of answers to some degree. So I always recommend, say, just leave it in the same window, don't open up in a new window, to help prevent at least some of those students from getting that idea that, oh, it's fine, I can just go look in my class or look through Google or whatever to look up those answers. So continuing on down the way, test availability. So make available to students, yes or no. So this is the one setting that does have to be changed on this page for students to be able to see this test. If you come in here and you make no other changes and you just submitted it right now, students wouldn't be able to access it. This is the one change that has to be made. I'm going to leave this set to no right now so we can see where kind of what happens when it's not available. But just know this is the one thing that has to be available. I'm going to call this is basically the power to the building. If the power to the building is on, nobody can get any power, get into it. Nobody can get any lights on inside the building. And I'll explain kind of more with that here in a little bit. And so now the next setting, add a new announcement. You can add an announcement that basically will automatically pop open when the test becomes available to say, hey, this new test is available. So you do have that option. Do know sometimes they seem to go wonky, and if you copy a course forward, even though the dates have been set to the new current dates, the first day of class, all those announcements become available, and your students are flooded with notifications that the midterm and the final are now available, even though they're not. So just be aware of that. Every once in a while we see that. It's not very often, but every once in a while we get that. Multiple attempts, then that allows us to say, do we want to allow them to take more than once? I'm going to go ahead and select that simply because if I need to retake it for any reason, I already have that set up. But you can do a one and done. You take it, once you're done, you're done. You can then set it to allow it for them to take it as many times as you want. This is good for practice tests or minor knowledge tests that you want them to do better on. But you can also then say, I'm going to give them a certain number of tests. This might be, we have a lot of faculty that let you do 2. You get the best of 2 attempts, or you get the highest of, or you get an average of the 2 attempts. I've also heard of one faculty member that they they put 2 attempts in, but under the score attempts using, they say the first graded attempt. Now, if a student comes and says, well, I had technical issue, then the professor says, well, you already have a second attempt, just go ahead and go take it, and then give me the reason why you think you should be able to determine why you should get that second attempt. So if your assignments are all due at midnight, and you don't want to be responsible for that last minute student taking it at 11 o'clock p.m. and then having a problem, if you do it this way and set it to 2 attempts, first graded attempt, then if they have a technical issue, they can just retake the test. They contact you and say, here's what happened, and then you can determine, okay, am I going to ignore that first attempt, or is that one going to be the one that sticks? And so it gives them the ability to take ownership and go ahead and get that second attempt without having to panic and wait for you to be able to reset it, but also allow you to have control over whether or not you're going to allow them to have a second attempt. And so I've seen that. So you have your options. Do you want to allow just the one? Do you want to have 2? Do you want to have as many as you want? Do you want to have a certain set? It all just depends on how you want your course set up. There's not a correct way, a best way. It's just kind of, what do you want to do? If you're not certain, let us know. Talk to us. We can kind of walk through some options and talk with you through things to see, what do you want to do? And that score attempts using, that only appears whenever you allow multiple attempts. And how is it going to be determined? Is it the highest, lowest, the last graded? What is it going to take that grade from? And so then our next setting, I always like to take a minute, let everyone get a breather before I say, please do not ever, ever, ever select forced completion. It always sounds like a great idea. Once started, this test must be completed in one sitting. So they can't get up and leave and go to Starbucks. They can't be perusing their emails and other things. But what happens is that the test will automatically submit if they leave the test. Now, if they lose their internet goes down momentarily, not even long enough that their computer recognizes the internet went down, but their wireless dropped for just a second and then picked right back up. Blackboard catches it and submits it on you. They then call you frantic. They call the help desk frantic. They start calling the department head frantic because nobody's answering, and their test just automatically submitted on them. And it's because something like their internet went down. I have even seen it happen that they had their email up, the email little notification bleeped on the screen, and it submitted on them because the system thought that this person had left the test. There's no way of knowing what happened. We don't know, was the student doing something that might be considered cheating? They were opening up Google. They were opening up a Messenger. Were they just a bad luck? Their internet died. They were in the middle of a tornado. What happened? We can't tell. All we can tell is they started it at this time, they answered these questions, and it's submitted automatically at this time. If they contact us, that's what will report to you as well as the student. This is when you started it. This is how many questions you answered, and this is when it was submitted. Unfortunately, there's nothing else we can find. So that's part of the reason why we don't recommend this setting. Now, there's then all this faculty that say, yeah, but how do I protect my test to make sure that students aren't looking up questions in Google? Students aren't doing these other things. Well, there's lots of other ways to do that. So inside of these settings, I'm going to talk about some of them. So one of the main ways is the timer, setting a time limit. How long do students have to take the test? So typically whenever students take tests, we recommend 1 minute per question for multiple choice questions, a little bit less if it's true, false, clearly more if it's short answer or essay questions. You just kind of got to look at your questions to see how much time. A good estimate is you take the test yourself. How long does it take you to take? However long it takes you to take, you need to give them at least that amount of time, if not more. We do have a question. Let me stop for just a minute. Does the multiple attempt option allow them to go back to the individual question and change the answer? This means nothing with that. Once it's submitted, it's submitted. So once they submit that test, they cannot go back and change anything. So that's what the multiple attempt means. Can they take another full attempt of an exam? The be able to go back to an individual question and change, that's an option down later, but a later option that we'll talk about later on for not being able to allow that. But yeah, the second attempt is an entire exam, a second full exam attempt. All right, so like I said, setting the timer. You want to make sure to limit the amount of time so that students don't have enough time to look up every single answer. But at the same time, you want to give them enough time that they can complete the test, of course. Now, does that mean that a student won't be able to look up any answer? Probably not. If you really are diligent about studying, you'll probably have time at the end of the exam to look up a few questions here and there. And there's different theories and stuff like that behind why you would want that to happen. But there is also some other kind of software that can help remove that option. It's called Respondus Lockdown Browser. I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but if you are interested in that, let us know. We did a session on it, I believe, last week or the week before with how to do that. I can always share that recording or get you individual information and help with that if you're interested in some of those additional kind of things. But yes, the timer is is one of the easiest way to help prevent students from being able to look up all of the answers. So with that, you set up however much time that they have, and then do you want it to automatically submit at the end of the time? So once, in my case, 5 minutes is up, will they be allowed to continue on or will it automatically submit? If I have the auto submit off and they are allowed to basically continue on if they so choose, it will mark it as needs grading. Even if it's a test that would automatically be grading, like a multiple choice, a true false, something that the system should automatically grade, it would still mark it as into needs grading, because it would let me know they're not following the parameters of this test. And so it would mark it as such that I know that I need to go back in and look at it. Then I could determine, do I want to accept all the questions because it was one answered late, or it was 3/4 of the test answered late because the students got up and walked away from the test and went to Starbucks or something. What do I want to do with those questions? All right, so continuing on down the road here. So display after and display until. So I can make this test magically appear or magically disappear at a certain time and date. I always like to point out that there is a end of day option here. So if I want to have it set to close at midnight on a specific day, this would be 11:59 p.m. And so this is what we recommend you doing over doing midnight on the following day. Because if you do midnight the following day, there are some places that it says due date on this date, but it doesn't make it clear that it's the very first minute of the day, not the very last minute of the day. And so students will think they have an additional day when really they don't have that. So do be aware of that you do have that option. One thing that this is also what I call the light switch in the room. Remember I mentioned the power in the building? If the power in the building, make available to students, is not set to yes, even though I have display after and display until dates set, it's not going to become available because the power is off, the light in the room can't come on. So do be aware of that. You do not have to use both. You can just have it magically appear and leave it open for the rest of the semester. Or you could have it available from the beginning of the semester and close at a certain date. You don't have to use those both at the same time. You can use one or the other or both. The password, you're probably not really going to ever use. Those are usually used in proctoring type situations, but you do have the option for password. If you think you're interested in using that, talk to us and we'll kind of walk through why you might or might not want to use that. Same thing with restrict location, only if you think you have a specific reason for doing that. Now the test availability exceptions, this is where most commonly it is used for two things. Oh, sorry, another question on display dates. What is the box for? I assume you're meaning this box, this checkbox. This is basically saying I want to use it. So right now, even though it says display after 1:57 p.m., this isn't actually taking effect because the checkbox isn't available. So I could change this to say 3 o'clock, and so now you see it changes that. But if I don't have that checked, it's not going to actually do anything. So I have to actually have it checked for it to take effect for anything. Test availability exceptions. So most common, this is for your students that have gone through like disability services and require the time and a half or the double time. You can actually set this up right in here. You select the specific student. You say how much time do they have. So if in my case it's a 5-minute test, if they have double time, I just type in 10. If they have time and a half, I would type in 7 or 8 so that they have the time and a half. And so it would give that one student the extra time without having duplicate tests in my course. It's a great feature. Additionally, if I have a student that needs to take a test early or take a test late, I can also set that up as well so that everything else remains the same, but that one student can access that test early or late through this test availability exceptions. Now with that, there is one setting you do have to be aware of, and it's in this next section with the due date. So the due date will then, if you set it up to have a due date, what it will do is it will also add that item to the calendar so that students can see it as being due on the calendar as well. Do be aware the due date does not appear on the calendar if the item itself or the folder that the item is in is closed. So if this is the midterm and it's in the midterm exam folder and the midterm exam folder doesn't open up until 2 weeks before the midterm date, then this due date does not show up on the calendar for students until that midterm exam folder becomes available. So you do have to be a little bit aware that the calendar is not always 100% perfect in those regards, but once that becomes available, it would then populate onto the calendar. With that, do not allow students to start the test if the due date is passed. This would allow me to leave the test available as far as these like availability dates are concerned, but not allow students to continue. Now with this, if I have a student taking it late and I have this checkbox marked for the due date, it would block the student trying to submit it late because it's not allowing them to get in afterwards. So be aware of that. I usually recommend either use display until dates or use the due date. Don't use necessarily both. There's some exceptions to that, but you just got to be aware that sometimes those can kind of block each other. The self-assessment options in this area, please don't change any of these unless you talk to us first, because there's actually a way that you can set this up so that you don't know who has completed the test and what the grades are, and there's no way for us to know either. So instead of restricting that, make sure you talk to us if you want to change any of these, and we can determine what are you looking for and what are you trying to do, and we can figure out what is the best way to do this. All right, and so show test results and feedback. So what are students going to see after the test is over? There are two options here. These do not work together. They are two separate ways that students can view things. I like to point that out. So the default is after submission, they're going to see the score per question, which basically means they can see the question and whether they got it right or wrong. Basically, how many points did I earn for each question? That's the default. I can always uncheck it so that students don't see anything after completion, or I can add additional things. I also have additional ones, a one-time view. Basically, as soon as they complete the test, they click OK, they can see this. Once they move away from that page, they can't see the review anymore. On specific date or after a due date, it looks, or after availability and date. So these two look at the dates that are higher up on this page and then allows the information to be shown after that. You can specify a specific date, and then after all attempts are graded, mean you have something that has to be graded, and then it would release it. You also have to be aware if you have anybody who does not take the test, or you have your preview user in there, you do want to make sure and enter a 0 for any of those people, because otherwise it will not release the grades if you do those after attempts are graded if someone does not have a grade in there. So with that, let me switch over real quick back to here. Whoops. Because I want to explain what each one of those kind of settings is. So the score per question, like I mentioned, it gives the question and then how many points did the student earn. All answers, the checkbox for that is going to show the question as well as all possible answers. It's not going to mark what's right or wrong or what the student selected. It's just giving all of the possible answers. The correct answer, again, the question, and then what is the correct answer. Submitted, the question, and then what the student selected as their answer. And then show incorrect questions is going to put a green check mark or a red X next to the correct or incorrect answers. Or incorrect questions, sorry. And then here's just an example of everything in here. So you can see the question, you can see whether it was right or wrong by the checkbox or red X on the left side. You can see how many points they earned, what the student selected, what the possible answers are, what the correct answer is. Students can see all of that information from here. You can then have any combination of any of that kind of information for you and your students to see. So what I generally recommend, if you're going to select any of these options, you make sure and do the show incorrect questions. It amazes me how many students who have this score per question, but not this show incorrect question, will come back and say, well, did I get it right or wrong? This is that visual cue to let them know you got it right, you got it wrong. And so without that, we get a lot of questions from students not sure whether they got something right or wrong. But with that, then you can then determine what else are you going to do. So I'm going to just do one option just so you have an idea of what that kind of looks like with partial things. Typically what I recommend is after submission doing like the score per question and the show incorrect questions and then submitted. So students can see, did I get it right or wrong and what did I submit? And then after the due date or after, specific date or something, I then include the correct and submitted answers as well. So that then they can see what exactly did I miss and what was the correct answer. There's no necessarily right or wrong for what is provided. I know a lot of faculty that don't provide anything to students, and they basically say, you want to know what you got right or wrong? You need to contact me. We'll set up like a Zoom meeting, or you can come to my office or whatever. We'll go over your test to be able to see what you got right, what you got wrong, and we can talk about it then. All right, so our last kind of area is down here, test presentation. So this is, how are my questions displayed for my students? Are they all at once, or are they one question at a time? If I do one question at a time, I then have that option for prohibit backtracking. That's what you were referring to, being able to change an individual question or answer and change an individual answer. Prohibit backtracking in conjunction with one at a time. When a student moves to question 2, they can't get back to question 1. When they move to question 3, they can't get back to question 2. I know nursing does a lot of this. I think there's some business that do this as well. And most of them do it because they have some kind of a state exam that requires that similar nature. And so it's a different mindset for taking an exam. So sometimes they do it to help prepare students for that kind of different mindset in taking an exam. It's either good or bad. It's up to you which way you do it. One thing that I do always recommend, make sure and do the one at a time question over the all at once, because it will force a connection to the system between each question. It's not a big deal on a 5-question test, but when a student has a 100-question test, if they lost internet access at question 5, that could be very frustrating to answer all the remaining questions, go to submit it, and they've lost all of those answers because their internet was no longer connected to the system. And so by doing one at a time, the very least, they get booted out of the course, they have to go back in, get back into that test to continue it. So they lose a minute or 2 of time, but at least they didn't lose any questions. They didn't lose all those questions. So we highly recommend doing one at a time for tests. There are reasons for doing it all at once, but like I said, in general, we recommend that one at a time. And then lastly, that randomized questions, do I want every student to have the same order? Now this pertains to those inline questions. If I have a question set or I have a random block, by their very nature, they randomize themselves. So you don't have to worry about them if you're using those. But if you are using inline questions, you may want to do randomized question so that no 2 students are going to get the same test itself. Question 1 will be a different question for somebody else. So those are all the test options. I'm going to click submit here. So that is going to save that. And so here we can see there's that long one where I have both the instructions and the descriptions showing. It also tells me item is hidden from students. So I know right here, students can't access this right now. One of the nice things is that if we click on our drop-down menu, there is this option right here to make it available, and it'll easily convert that. Now, if it was not available because of a date, I would have to click back on it and go to edit the test options. So edit the test takes me back to be able to edit the test questions, kind of that first area we were in. Edit the test options is that page we were just on for how is it deployed, how do my students access it. And so if I did have a date restriction, I would have to do edit the test options to change it. It would tell me, you know, it was last available on, or it will not be available until. It would tell me that information on that line under it where it said make this item is not available. But this would give me additional information from there. There's a lot more options in here. I'm not going to go over all the different options, but if you're interested in any of them, let us know and we can kind of talk you through any of those if you need some help with any of them. So that's the process for setting up the test. Sorry, let me take a drink. So I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to launch a poll. And basically, I want to get an idea of what now that we've gone through all of those test settings, what were some of the options that we recommended for setting up your tests? You can select more than one here. So we're just kind of going through, kind of looking at which of these following steps were things that we kind of recommended when you're creating a test. Give everyone just a few seconds, still working on things. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end it now. And so for the most part, everyone got most of the ones that we recommend. There are a couple that we don't necessarily recommend. The forced completion, we don't really recommend very often because it can cause some issues with students who their test automatically submits on them and there's not really a good reason for it necessarily, that there's no way for us to know what that reason is. And then present all questions at once. Generally, we don't necessarily recommend that one. And somebody may have been thinking, what are the things we don't recommend, and selected both of those two. But those are kind of the two ones that we don't really recommend. The other options are the kind of things that more or less we recommend depending on kind of some of your other settings. All right. So let me continue on here. All right, so now let me take a look at this as if I was a student. So I'm going to go into student preview. I'm going to go to my test. Okay, so as a student, I'm getting ready to take this test. Notice there, that's the test description and instructions that was available whenever we were editing the test options. So I click on the title, it pulls up kind of instructions. There's the description, but notice it does not have that test instructions on this page. Those were those check boxes that I checked on the test options where I checked one but not the other. It tells me the time limit. It tells me that when the time expires, I may continue or submit it. It does tell me, this is one thing that I always like to mention, this test can be saved and resumed later. Students read this part, but they forget to read the second part. The timer will continue to run if you leave the test. So they see, oh, I can save and resume it, but they don't see that the timer continued to run. So every once in a while, you'll get a student that will start the test, and they're like, oh, I think I'm going to go run to Starbucks real quick. And so they save it, they leave, they go to Starbucks, they come back, and they're like, wait a minute, my timer, it's gone. I've ran out of time. Well, they didn't read this part where the timer continues to run. The timer starts from the moment you click begin, and it continues to run until the test is submitted. So it doesn't stop if you leave the test. So don't worry about that. A lot of faculty say, well, that's why I want forced completion on. No, that doesn't have any effect on the timer itself. The timer will continue to run if a student leaves the test. So just be aware of that. It does tell that, you know, there are multiple attempts. It would give the student due dates, different things like that based on my settings that I might have set. So I'm going to click begin because I'm ready to start my test. Notice up in my test information, here it gives me my description as well as my instructions. So here it gives me both of them. It gives me additional information on my time, how many attempts, some different things like that. If this is taking up a lot of screen, maybe I have a much smaller screen, I can also click on test information to collapse that so that I get a little bit more real estate on this page. Below that, there's then the timer. You can see it kind of marches across the screen as the timer goes along. It gives a visual cue of how much time the student might have. Then we have our question completion status, and I'll come back to this in just a little bit. And then our question itself. Because I have this set to one question at a time, it just shows one question here. I can click on what color is the sky. I'm going to select the correct answer, blue. And then if we wait just a minute, it will save it automatically. I can then move to my next question. I could also then select an answer and click Save Answer as well. And we'll notice as we save it, it also saves it up here as a different color so I can tell what questions I have selected. So I'm going to answer another one. We'll notice there. So there it is. So I'm going to go to my next question. I'm going to skip that question and come on to my next one, answer it. And so I could go through, because again, I've set the option to allow me to continue on, to allow the backtracking. I can come in and out. And so I can see I haven't answered question number 4. I'm going to go ahead and save this and submit it and go, oh, oops, I forgot question number 4. I can click on it and cancel to go back. So it does warn me that I didn't answer a question. The nice thing about this question completion status also is I can actually click on question 4 and it'll take me right to that question. So I'm not having to click back. In a 6-question test, that's not a big deal. But in a 100-question test, if I didn't answer question number 5, that's a lot of back to get back to question number 5. Where this would allow me to jump to question 5 or whatever it is, answer, save it, and then I can say, okay, I need to go back to the last answer to be able to submit it. So I'm going to do 6 to get back to the end, and now I can submit. So it's going to give me a little warning, am I ready? I click OK, and so now that submits. I get a little receipt kind of area letting me know when I submitted it and how long. I click OK, and then there is the information that my professor has allowed me to see. So again, the submitted answers and the incorrectly answered questions, and so I can see the question, what I submitted, whether I got it right or wrong, and how many points I've earned for each question. And so I can also see how many points I got, 60 out of 100 points. And so I could then see all of that kind of information on here. I click OK, it takes me back to that beginning start. If I was allowed to take more than one test or more than one time, I could come back in. Once I click begin, it gives me a little warning message here to be able to start a new one. So let me exit out of here. I'm going to keep this though so we can go in and kind of look at it from the instructor side and grading. So let me switch back over to my PowerPoint real quick because there's a couple of other things. So one area that you can also go to is the needs grading. So in the control panel, if you go to Grade Center and then go to needs grading, anything that students might need you to grade, essays, short answers, a student went over the time limit, a student submitted after the due date, all of those would end up in needs grading for me to take a look at for something that I either need to manually grade or determine if I'm going to accept the grade. If it's something that went over the time limit or something that went over the due date, there's also a way that I can see where were they at when the timer ended or the due date passed, and am I going to allow those additional answers or am I going to take points off for those additional ones? I have all of those kind of options because I can see who didn't meet that criteria. And so basically in here, it's going to pull up a page. I can grade everything. So everyone in this course would be listed here. I click on the user attempt and it's going to open up my test for me. If it's something that is graded that I have to grade, such as an essay, here's an example. I notice I can do a response feedback on it. It also has a little example correct answer. And then up in the top right-hand corner, I enter how many points that student would earn. I click save, and then it would submit that test in for me, or submit that question. I could complete all of them and it would submit it over for me. So in the grade book, then I like to point out there's several different kind of options you might see whenever it comes time to see your grades. I'll show some other things here in the grade book in just a second in the full grade center. So the yellow exclamation mark means that there's something that needs to be graded. So something that the student hasn't completed, or something that I have to look at. It's an essay, it's a short answer, they went over the time limit, they went past the deadline, the due date, something that I need to take a look at. The numbers mean that it's been graded and it completed, whether it's an all multiple choice test or something that an automatic grading test, or something I've already graded. The double dashes mean it's somebody who did not take it. So my screenshot, Chris Casper and Linda Herrera did not complete this test. And then my blue circle that test student has means that the student did not submit the test. So either the student is still in that test and they're still working on it and haven't submitted it, or they left the test without it submitting. In the case of tests, I can actually go in and submit for the student. So if it's past the deadline, past the due date, past the availability date, I can open up that test and actually submit it for them so that it will push what they have submitted so far or saved so far into the grade book. And so that's kind of those kind of options. Let me go back into here and let's look at some other things. So under the Grade Center, again, full Grade Center. So here's my exam 1. If I click on my drop down for my student, notice that I have a view grade details, I have quick comment, exempt, and attempt. If I click on attempt, it's going to take me right into that student's attempt so I can see everything that they've done. I can then edit anything if I need to edit anything here. Also in here, so if I go to the view grade details, this gives me a little bit more information about some other things. I can see what point it is. I can see all of their attempts. If I had multiple attempts, those would all be listed here. I can view the attempt from here, but I can also clear or ignore the attempt. Now, generally, I recommend ignoring the attempt over clearing the attempt. And mostly that's because if I wanted to keep track of how many times am I having to clear a student's test, if every time they take a test I'm having to clear it, I might want to keep track of that and start to look at, okay, what's going on their first attempt? Are they just going in and looking at all the answers, taking screenshots maybe or something? Or is there some, are they diligently trying to complete the test? What's going on? I can see a pattern, and it's a lot easier if I just click on, especially if I just go through and click on this little drop-down menu and can see each one of their attempts. Oh, they have 2 attempts here. Oh, they have 2 attempts for this one. Oh, they have 2 attempts for this one. Where if I cleared it, I would only ever see just the 1 attempt here. So I generally always recommend ignoring the attempt so you can always see what was submitted. It also, if you clear the attempt, we don't know what answers were submitted or anything like that. It completely gets rid of the attempt. We can't look at it at all. Where ignoring just leaves it in the system, but it doesn't count it for or against the student. So also inside of any attempt, just like with the essays, you can change points. So if you want to say, you know what, I'm going to give you half credit because you can give me a reason why the sun might be blue on a special day or something like that. You can go in and alter any of those kinds of questions if you want to change any of those. Also in the test information area, you can clear the attempt from here. You can go to edit the test from here as well. And this access log, this is where I was mentioning if you want to be able to check what was submitted basically after a due date, you can see when something was submitted to see, oh, you know what, this was due at 2/27, so questions 5, 6, and question 4 were submitted after, were saved after the 2/27, so I'm not going to accept those, so let me go find them in here and change those grade points to 0. Or over the time limit. They only had a minute to do this. Well, here's from questions 3 on, those were all done after a minute, so I'm not going to accept any of those answers. And so I could see that and be able to edit my questions by coming in and then again just changing the point values for them. And so we can do all of that from here. So since I changed one of the test questions, I'm going to click submit. And we'll notice that my grade then changed here as well. So I want to go back into student preview one more time, just so we can see. So as a student, I could go back to my exam, I could click on begin, and I could click on view all attempts to see my attempt this way. Additionally, I can go to my grades, and this is the way most students and how we recommend students go, is go to my grades, locate their test, click on the test name. They can see all of their attempts, and if they click on the grade, they're returned to whatever information the professors have provided that they see. This is similar to what we saw after we completed the test. It's the same information because we have it set to that. I can now also see where I got partial credit for this one answer, and so I can go through and see all of that. So that is how a student can then see their grades. We do have instructions on our help website for how to do this, so it's not necessarily something that you have to tell your students how to do. We have directions for them to be able to do this. So I want to stop and take a little bit of time and see if anyone has any questions on how to do anything, how to build a test, how to take a test as a student, how to grade a test, how students view grades, any kind of questions that you have regarding tests for a moment. All right, so I'm not really seeing any questions, but I'm going to keep giving everyone a little bit of time. So no worries if you got any questions. Just kind of as a little bit of a follow-up, so if you ever have any questions or problems, need any help, please let us know. Like I mentioned, we do have some other kind of services, like we have Respondus Lockdown Browser that kind of works in conjunction with tests. We have a live proctoring Examity that you can also set up. Do you know there is a fee associated with Examity for the students, where Respondus Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor doesn't require a fee. If you're interested in any of those, talk to us and let us know about them. Additionally, if you are one of those people that was used to emailing us basically your test and having us import the test in, that is still an option. We don't want to take that away from you, because we do know that building tests can be very daunting, but we like for you to know a little bit more about what are the test settings, why are they there, what are the recommendations, different things like that. Additionally, if you're interested in learning how to do it yourself and import it in yourself, we can walk you through that as well. We prefer to not do that in this next month. We're kind of getting busy trying to get set up with getting classes started, but after classes started, we'd be happy to help you with that especially. So this is not taking that ability away for you to be able to send us a test to import in. We just want to make sure you kind of know what all is going on behind the scenes as well. So I have one last poll question. Again, if you have any questions, let us know, please, as we're in the chat box or following up with us. We just kind of want to know, as a follow-up, how comfortable do you feel now creating a test? Are you ready to go using at least multiple choice questions? Are you ready to go exploring with, what other question types are possible? Or do you still have some questions and you may still need some help? Kind of where are you sitting now that you've been through this, test, and how do you do tests? Give everyone just a little bit of time. Looks like so far a lot of people are ready to go with multiple choice questions at the very least, and a good portion of people are ready to go exploring as well. So I want to thank all of y'all, just as kind of a follow-up. I want to thank all of y'all. I will be sending out in today or tomorrow a recording of this, as well as some additional information on tests and different things like resources for where to go and feedback link for this session as well, so that we can get feedback to try to improve for our next time. Looks like most everyone has submitted, so thank you all for coming. I'm not seeing any additional questions, so I want to thank everyone for coming. Feel free to stick around if you do have any questions, or thanks for coming, and I hope to see you for the rest of this week. We still have assignments and discussions coming on this week, and we hope to see y'all there as well.